Hello history lovers and welcome back to the channel. In the last episode we explored the early life of King Henry VIII's first wife and queen, Katherine of Aragon. We looked at her life as the Infanta of Spain and finished the episode with her wedding to King Henry VIII, making her the Queen of England. If you haven't seen that video, then be sure to go check it out, duh! Subscribe if you haven't already, and let's continue Catherine's story. After her marriage to Henry, Katherine ditched the Spanish farthingale and adopted an English dress sense. Good, because by all accounts, Katherine, that Spanish dress did nothing for you. January 1510 was exciting for two reasons. One, because Queen Katherine was already pregnant, and Henry ordered the construction of the infamous Mary Rose, named for his sister, and its sister ship, the Peter Pomegranate. The pomegranate was his wife's symbol, representing fertility, so this ship was clearly named for his wife. However, after their divorce, spoiler alert, the ship was known as just Peter. On the 31st of January 1510, Katherine felt a pain in her leg and went into labour. The child was stillborn. This wasn't uncommon for a first pregnancy, but that didn't stop her guilt or depression at the loss of a child. Henry, to his credit, tried to reassure and comfort Katherine, which must have worked because she got pregnant again pretty quickly. And this second pregnancy lifted her spirits, and she was certain that this time it would be a healthy baby boy. It was around this time that we think Henry took Anne Stafford as his mistress. Henry used Sir William Compton as a go-between. Anne would eventually have an affair with Compton, and a pissed Henry sent Anne away from court in retaliation. Queen Katherine was furious. Despite her father's infidelity, her parents had a loving relationship, and this was one aspect her education had not prepared her for. Katherine berated Henry, and he didn't understand what the issue was, as remember, it was normal for kings to have mistresses, and he had tried to be discreet. He did not intend to publicly humiliate her, like she was doing now. He tried to do it in secret, guys. That's true love, right? Right? Katherine was criticised by many at court for her behaviour in handling her husband's affair, and from then on, she learned to turn a blind eye. And I thought I would include this as you can see a stark contrast to how she handles Henry's first affair and his last affair in their marriage with Anne Boleyn. With Anne, Katherine doesn't bat an eyelid, as Henry has been doing it throughout their marriage, and as was proven in this instance, if she did complain, nothing changed. Katherine would give birth to a son named Henry after his father on the 1st of January 1511 at Richmond Palace. The celebrations for his birth lasted almost as long as the tiny prince's life. He was christened at Richmond Palace on the 5th of January, and his godparents were the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Earl of Surrey, and the Countess of Devon. Henry could not do enough to praise and honour Katherine for delivering his heir. The whole kingdom engaged in joyous celebrations, and the most extravagant of jousts was held to celebrate. The king's armour was engraved with the intertwined H's and K's, and he jousted under the name of Coeur Loyal, Sir Loyalheart. However, on the 22nd of February 1511, the young Prince Henry, Duke of Cornwall, died. The king and queen were distraught, and he did his best to yet again comfort her. But there is no evidence that Henry himself outwardly mourned. The boy was given a lavish funeral. The king relied heavily on his wife for advice during his early reign, and would often say, "The queen must hear of this," and would rarely take action without discussing it with Katherine first. And I think she enjoyed feeling like this, like she and Henry were a team rather than just being a passive queen. I also think Katherine's time as the Spanish ambassador gave her the experience of being a helpful companion when it came to politics. In June 1513, Henry went on campaign in France, and he appointed Katherine as regent in his absence. In the summer was the Battle of Spurs, which we initially won because the French fled before any real fighting could happen, but England wasn't able to retain what they had won, so I guess in the long run it was a loss. And then on the 9th of September was the Battle of Flodden, where Catherine really shone. The Queen was heavily pregnant at the time, and she mirrored her mother, who would also go on campaign and be at war while pregnant. Catherine herself had been born during a war. The English fought the Scottish at the Battle of Flodden, which we won. The biggest casualty of the battle was the Scottish king, King James IV. Catherine revelled in her win and proposed sending King James's corpse to her husband in France as a trophy. However, even her English soldiers thought it was a bit too gruesome, so instead she wrote to him, as in Henry, "This battle hath been to your grace and all your realm the greatest honour that could be, and more than ye should win all the crown of France." Despite the victory, the stress of the battle must have been too much, as Catherine's baby, the one she was pregnant with during the Battle of Flodden, was a stillbirth. Henry returned to England in the October. Catherine quickly got pregnant again, but this was another stillbirth in 1514. It was around this time that Henry would start seeing one of his most infamous mistresses, Elizabeth Bessie Blount. At this point, Catherine had had 4 pregnancies. She was a few years older than her husband after all, and she had been intended for his older brother, and her looks were starting to fade, while Henry was becoming a handsome young man. To compensate, Catherine took a leaf out of her mother's book and dressed herself as magnificently as she could. On the 18th of February 1516, the royal couple finally welcomed a healthy baby. It was a girl named Mary. Henry was disappointed that she wasn't a boy, but still hopeful that he and Catherine would have more children. "We are both young. If it was a daughter this time, by the grace of God the sons will follow." And he called Mary a right lusty princess. Catherine was very maternal and protective of her daughter, a fact that would never change. In the June, Catherine's chief confidant and lady-in-waiting, Maria di Selina, married William Lord Willoughby. They would go on to have a daughter, whom they named Catherine after the Queen. The Queen was also the baby's godmother. In May 1517, King Henry and Queen Catherine were having a picnic in Greenwich when they were informed of a fight that had broken out between the apprentices of London and the Europeans who had arrived. I'm assuming it's the same old backwards argument of the foreigners are taking our jobs. The King's Guard got the rioters under control, and Henry was determined to avenge the outrage committed against the foreigners who had arrived under his protection. As Europe at the time was unusually in a time of peace. As a result, Henry condemned the apprentices to death.
"You're fired."
But Catherine, who was sat on her throne, couldn't bear to watch, so she knelt before him and in tears begged him to spare the apprentices. Thomas Wolsey knew that an act of mercy would increase the popularity of everyone involved, and so he too pleaded for the king for mercy. Wolsey and Catherine were right, and the king spared them thanks to the influence of his wife. 1518 was Catherine's last pregnancy, and as the previous pregnancy resulted in a healthy baby who was now 2 years old, Henry made an utter fuss of Catherine, making sure that she had everything she needed, as he knew all too well at this point that a healthy baby was not a guarantee. King Francis I of France blamed Henry's lack of heir on his decision of marrying a woman older than himself and said, "My good brother of England has no son, because although young and handsome, he keeps an old and deformed wife." Unfortunately, like the majority of her pregnancies, this one would not produce an heir for her husband. We mentioned earlier that Catherine was struggling to keep up appearances. Her figure was ruined by pregnancies, and she was aging quicker than her husband. But Henry did not once reproach Catherine on her looks, or for his lack of a male heir. Unfortunately, wives 2 and 4 didn't have the same luxury. Henry had been clean-shaven until 1518, and then he grew a beard. He then said that he would not shave his beard until he had met his new ally, King Francis. But Catherine hated his beard, and in November 1519, forgetting his agreement with Francis, shaved it off. Francis was furious when he met with a clean-shaven Henry at the Field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520. But Catherine stepped in, and Francis found it amusing that a mighty sovereign could be influenced by his wife like that. In January 1519, Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian died, and his grandson, Catherine's nephew, became Emperor Charles V. On the 15th of June 1519, Catherine would face the ultimate humiliation when her husband's mistress, Bessie Blount, gives birth to a healthy baby boy, who is named Henry after his father. And the birth of Fitzroy is really the beginning of the end for Catherine, as in Henry's eyes, it means that he isn't the issue. Catherine is. He can provide a son. It's Catherine that can't. This is also the time he starts to have doubts about his marriage. I do wonder if Bessie Blount had given birth to a girl, or the baby had miscarried. Would Henry have divorced Catherine? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. In May 1520, Charles V came to England in hopes of forging an alliance. Catherine is elated as she had never met her nephew, and as Catherine knows, having powerful family members is always a good thing. I thank God I shall see his face. And actually, if you think about it in this day and age, it's actually quite a sad thought that she had never met her nephew up until this point. The Field of the Cloth of Gold, one of the most expensive failures in history, occurred between the 7th and the 24th of June in France. This peacocking event achieved nothing, and the peace they were trying to create only led them to make more alliances with other people. However, the two queens, Katherine of England and Claude of France, got on very well, and the two women bonded over religion. The Dowager Queen of France and Catherine's sister-in-law, Mary Tudor, was also there. On the 25th of June, the English court went home, while Catherine and Henry hosted a banquet for the new Emperor Charles, much to the displeasure of Francis. You know, the guy who Henry basically spent the last 2 weeks trying to make peace with. In 1522, the Boleyn sisters also returned to England, although Mary Boleyn had actually been there slightly sooner than that, and Anne joins the Queen's household. By 1524, Catherine had started the menopause, so more children was out of the question, and so far Henry only had 2, a girl and an illegitimate boy. Henry had considered legitimising Fitzroy, and even a marriage between the half-siblings. Blech.
Gross.
But there was no way of knowing if the English subjects would accept such a match. In August 1525, Henry sent his daughter Mary to Ludlow Castle, the traditional home for the Prince of Wales, and to all extent, it looked like that Mary would be his heir, or the Princess of Wales, just without the official title. That same year, Fitzroy was given the dukedoms of Richmond and Somerset, and appointed Lord High Admiral. This greatly offended Catherine, as this illegitimate child was being treated like a legitimate prince. And if that was the case, what's to say that the child or his mother doesn't take precedence over her or her child? Although ultimately we know that will never be the case. In the summer of 1526, King Francis I offered himself as a husband for the Princess Mary, as his wife Claude died in 1524. Henry was enthusiastic, Catherine not so much, and nothing would come of this match. And although Henry and Catherine stopped sleeping with each other, they still put on a united front in public, appearing at events together. Christmas 1526, the Princess Mary came to Greenwich, and I can imagine this was a happy reunion for mother and daughter, as Catherine had not seen Mary since August of 1525, and Mary resides at Ludlow in Wales, which isn't exactly close to London. In 1527, Henry, who had been doubting his marriage the past 3 years, has convinced himself that his marriage to Catherine was against divine law, and the deaths of his children were because God was angry with him, as he had married his brother's widow, and started to quote Leviticus. Leviticus chapter 20, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless." It might sound slightly flippant or silly to say now, but you have to remember how deeply religious people were in the 1500s. And Henry would have felt this with every fibre of his being. Henry asked Pope Clement VII to help with an annulment. However, there was 2 issues with this. Pope Clement was a prisoner of Emperor Charles V, the nephew of Catherine, during 1527 to 1528. The other issue is the previous pope issued a dispensation so that they could get married in the first place. If Pope Clement goes back on that, then it suggests that the previous pope was wrong, and the pope is God's representation on earth, so the pope can't be wrong, because if the pope is wrong, then God is wrong. Unsurprisingly, the pope refused to grant a divorce or an annulment. Emperor Charles V cared about family honour, and a divorce would tarnish his aunt's honour. He also had an alliance with England through Catherine, and losing England would weaken his forces, and seeing as he was his prisoner, Pope Clement refused the divorce, so he didn't enrage Charles. By 1527, Henry had started to court Anne Boleyn, allegedly in Runnymede underneath the Ankerwyck yew tree, and he may have even proposed there. So Henry wanted to divorce Catherine for 3 reasons: no male heir, new love, and she was Spanish, which was no longer fashionable, especially as Henry now wanted a French alliance. Again, this could be down to Anne's influence, having been raised at the French court. Deciding he didn't need the Pope, Henry turned to Cardinal Wolsey and told him to fix it. And that's a direct quote. I know, I was there.
Really?
No, not really. I can't back that up.
Wolsey tried 3 different attempts using the Bible and Leviticus, but for reasons mentioned earlier that didn't work. Then he tried to free Pope Clement from his imprisonment by forming an alliance with France, but the emperor was too powerful and France chickened out. His 3rd attempt was to hold a divorce proceeding in England, as Cardinal Wolsey was the Pope's representation in England, so he should be able to do it. However, Pope Clement wanted to prolong the proceedings, hoping that Henry and Catherine would sort out their differences. So he requested that Cardinal Campeggio attended the divorce proceedings in his place. Campeggio was tasked with stringing out the proceedings for as long as possible, which he did. Believing that his divorce was well underway, Henry proposed to Anne Boleyn, and they agreed to marry when he was free to do so. Anne had the king's ear, and was carefully introducing him to the reformist faith. And don't get me wrong, I don't think he was ever a Protestant. I think Henry was a Catholic until he died. But I think the Protestant faith had a few things in it that were convenient, and that he liked the sound of. Catherine, meanwhile, is pleading with Henry to see sense, that their marriage is lawful, and to not go through with the divorce. Henry is unswayed, and is getting frustrated with Wolsey, to the point that his failure to grant Henry a divorce is what led to Wolsey's downfall. Henry even accused Wolsey of working with the Pope and not the King. I hope you enjoyed this video. We will be discussing the later part of Catherine's life in the next video. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to like, share and subscribe. And if you can't wait till next time, why not check out my other videos on Catherine's daughter Mary, her successor Anne Boleyn, or even her husband. But until the next one, have a wonderful day.